Good afternoon. Today, the Senate is poised to confirm Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson to the United States Supreme Court. She will be the 116th person to serve as a justice on the Supreme Court of the United States. Based on her record, I believe she will prove to be the furthest left of any justice to have ever served on the Supreme Court. Based on her record, I think we can anticipate that she will vote consistently to undermine the constitutional rights of Americans, to undermine our rights to free speech, to undermine our rights to religious liberty, to undermine our rights under the Second Amendment to keep and bear arms. But there is no area of law where her record is more extreme than in criminal law. When it concerns criminal law, Judge Jackson's record is far, far, far out of the mainstream. If you examine her time as a federal district judge, for all criminal cases before her court, she sentenced criminal defendants on average to 29.9 months. The average nationally for all federal judges, and that includes Republican district judges, Democrat district judges, that includes judges appointed by Barack Obama, by Bill Clinton, by Jimmy Carter. The average nationally is 45.1 months. Judge Jackson's is 34% less than that at 29.9. But then, as you're aware, not only is her record consistently in favor of very, very lenient sentences for violent criminals, for drug dealers, for those who have committed horrific crimes, but she has a particular pattern of leniency for sex offenders that is deeply dismaying. If you examine the crimes of possession of child pornography and distribution of child pornography, these are horrifying crimes. She had these cases repeatedly before her during her time as a district judge. For possession of child pornography, the national average for sentencing is 68 months. Judge Jackson's average sentence for the exact same crime is 29.2 months. 57% lower than the average sentence imposed by other federal district judges. If you examine the even worse crime of distribution of child pornography, the average sentence nationally is 135 months, 11 years. It's a long time because it's a serious and horrific crime. Judge Jackson's average sentence was 71.9 months, 47% less than the national average. With distribution, it's even starker than that because distribution of child pornography carries with it a mandatory minimum sentence of 60 months. Under the law, she could not sentence anyone less than 60 months. And for many of the defendants, she did exactly that and sentenced at the absolute lowest sentence allowable under the law. On average, nationally, every federal district judge sentences those convicted of distribution of child pornography to 135 months, which is 75 months more than the mandatory minimum sentence. Judge Jackson, on average, sentenced those same defendants to just 11.9 months more than the mandatory minimum sentence. This is a disturbing pattern, and it's a pattern that one sees reading the transcripts from her sentencing hearings, where on the bench she repeatedly expressed that she felt bad for the criminal defendants who were pleading guilty to these criminal offenses. And it's worth noting, the offenses here did not involve consenting adults. These were little children being horribly sexually violated in a way that we know does permanent and lasting damage to those kids. Judge Jackson from the bench would give speeches where she would acknowledge this is not a victimless crime. These little children, 11, 10, 8, sometimes toddlers or even younger, the horrible assaults that they're videoed undergoing will stay with them forever. Her speeches were powerful. And then over and over and over again, she would give them a slap on the wrist, the defendant, and sentence them to very, very low sentences. She is an extreme outlier on the question of crime. And as a Supreme Court justice, I think we can reasonably expect that Justice Jackson will consistently vote, as she has done as a judge for the last 10 years, for more lenient sentences for criminal defendants, for releasing violent criminals, for lessening the punishment on the very worst sex offenders. This is a nomination that was out of the mainstream, and I believe it's a nomination that jeopardizes the constitutional rights of every American. Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Senator Cruz. You know, the media has spent a lot of their time talking about the historical nature of this nomination, and indeed, it is historical. And Judge Jackson is well educated. She has a wonderful family. She has spent time visiting with us. But here's the thing. Just as Senator Cruz pointed out for you, she is wrong on the issues. When you look at her sentencing practices, when you look at the leniency that she has practiced when she is releasing criminals, these are all issues that cause us tremendous concern. Now, did we try to get answers from her, straight answers, about why she made these decisions? Indeed, we did. Were those answers satisfactory? Were they fulsome answers that dealt with her judicial philosophy? No, they were not. Indeed, I told her that I was going to ask her about parental rights, about CRT, about biological males competing against biological females. And I was surprised that she did not come ready to answer those questions. And then when I asked her to give me the definition of the word woman, as we were discussing the VMI decision and Ginsburg saying there are enduring differences between male and female, she said she couldn't give that definition. And of course, we know why. It is because the dark money leftist groups that have been pushing to have a progressive on the Supreme Court have been pushing her nomination and confirmation do not want that definition. They're trying to erase woman. They are trying to push this agenda of woke education. These are some of the reasons for me that I cannot vote to confirm her to the U.S. Supreme Court.
Senator Lee.
Judge Jackson seems like a great person. She's got impressive academic and professional qualifications. I enjoyed meeting her husband and her two daughters, and I also just enjoyed visiting with her. I'd love to be able to support her. I can't. The reason I can't has to do with her judicial philosophy, her jurisprudential approach, the manner in which she approaches the judicial task. We've heard from some of my colleagues today about sentences that she's imposed, and I'll not elaborate on that because it's already been covered extensively. But I will add one thing. In these child pornography cases, it wasn't just the sentences that were imposed. Those were troubling. And I will add here, they were ubiquitous. They were in every single case of that category that she ever handled. It becomes impossible to argue that these are statistical aberrations, that they're one-offs, that they're unique in some regard, when every single case that she handled, she imposed a sentence substantially below the national average, substantially below where the guidelines and the law would put them. It wasn't just where she put them and that they were universally low. It was also the explanation she provided for us in response to it. Look, there are a number of factors that have to be considered, factors that are guided by statute, 18 U.S.C. 3553. There are a number of sentencing enhancements that come into play when you're sentencing this type of defendant. Some of them have to do with the number of photos transmitted, whether they were transmitted and received electronically by computer, whether prepubescent victims were involved, whether there was torture, sadomasochistic conduct involved in them. Very often, when you'd read through her sentencing transcripts in these cases, she would more or less sweep all of those to the side and either way downplaying them, imposing none of them, or imposing them only to a very slight degree because of the fact that she disagreed with the overall approach taken by the Sentencing Commission, an approach that she said was rooted in the fact that when they wrote the original guidelines, they didn't have in mind widespread electronic transmission. And so to have the same number of photos delivered to someone in hard copy would be more difficult and therefore less common. Somehow she reached the conclusion that that means we should sentence these defendants to lower sentences instead of higher sentences. I read it the exact opposite way. When a particular crime has become more ubiquitous, more common, more easy to carry out, and therefore more pernicious, keeping in mind this is the most vile conduct known to human beings, child sex torture that's then put into a commercialized form, I found her reasoning unpersuasive and circular and not consistent with the law. Now, one of the arguments that she made in addition to that was, well, you can't see all the factors. You don't see all the factors that I took into account, and I can't replicate all those for you because I don't have the pre-sentence reports in front of me. So we asked for those. She said she couldn't get them, which I find surprising because she had information that she provided to the White House provided to the Democrats on the committee, and only the Democrats on the committee until we discovered what had happened. And then we said, okay, if you're going to give some information from the pre-sentence reports, we'd like to have all of it. They refused to allow us access to the pre-sentence reports. Chairman Durbin said, okay, well, we can't give you that because it contains sensitive information. And pre-sentence reports do contain sensitive information. We review sensitive information all the time in this body. We have entire rooms that are set aside for that purpose. We have procedures that are set aside for that purpose. We have significant penalties that would attach any member of this body leaking the contents of those for that purpose. We have the ability to redact out names, personally identifying information involving victims for that very purpose, and yet they wouldn't let us have that. That tells us something. Tells us something that connects back up to the fact that she doesn't want to tell us what her judicial philosophy is, instead saying, look at my record. We look at her record, we can't gain access to all of her record. My concerns with her aren't limited to the criminal realm. I wish they were, they're not. Look at some of the decisions that she made on the civil side. On the civil side, particularly involving administrative determinations made by the Trump administration with which she disagreed. You can think of at least two instances where, as a district judge, she knocked down a Trump administration executive determination and action that she apparently disagreed with politically, under circumstances in which there was no viable cause of action and under circumstances in which she lacked jurisdiction. And in both cases, she was overturned, she was reversed by the liberal-leaning U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit. These are deeply concerning. They reflect on something very important in our system. We immunize, we take outside of the political realm Supreme Court justices, and we give them presumptive life tenure for a very important reason. But with that comes some real responsibility to operate conscientiously only within the realm of the judicial branch. She's exceeded that far too many times for my comfort. I can't support her.
Senator Grant.
So this started with a decision by President Biden. He announced during the campaign he would pick an African-American female to serve on the court. And, you know, we've had our differences in our party about that. But the bottom line is there were a lot of qualified African-American women that the president could have chosen. I would expect him to choose somebody different than I would have chosen. I'd expect him to choose someone that would be associated with the liberal camp. I expect all that. Michelle Childs was supported by Congressman Clyburn. She's a district court judge from South Carolina. He called me and asked if, I'm thinking about pushing her. What do you think? I said, well, I know her pretty well. Somebody I could support. I think Senator Scott knew her pretty well. So for whatever it matters, I think we could get some Republican votes for Michelle Childs. And that's how this whole thing started. Then the left responded pretty fiercely. All of the groups that are associated with this Arabella organization, the George Soros world, basically declared war on nominees other than Judge Jackson. Now I know why. Now I know why they wanted her. And let me give you an example of why they wanted her. The immigration case. President Trump decided to use statutory authority granted to any president for expedited removal procedures for people here 2 years or less. He expanded the Obama policy. The statute in question is about as clear as you could write a law. If you had a contest to write a law to tell a judge this is a discretionary decision, this statute would have won. Sole discretion of the secretary unreviewable. So Judge Jackson, the plaintiff, was in the Arabella chain. It was one of these groups from New York that was getting money from the Soros world. And, they're very activists. They have a right to be whatever they want to be. At the end of the day, she did, I think, legal gymnastics to say that the decision violated the Administrative Procedures Act. If I had to explain to a law school class what activism looks like, it would be the immigration case involving Trump. So this was an audition to the left, and I think she passed. The criminal cases have been explored in great detail, and I want to thank Senator Cruz and Hawley and the other members of the committee for asking her hard questions about how she sentences people in the criminal realm. I think that is very fair game. I thought she was incredibly evasive. And what did I get out of the hearing? That her sentencing methodology has no deterrence when it comes to child pornography, in my view. The sentencing enhancing factors of using the internet, a computer, and the volume of information she routinely ignores. She made a policy decision as a judge. I will not hold it against the criminal defendant for the amount of pornography they possess. I think that is a huge mistake. I think every judge should hold it against criminal defendants in this arena for the amount of pornography they possess, because every photo, every image, every video is a destroyed life. She also says, I will not hold it against the defendant for accessing electronic means, because this statute was written to deal with mail, pornography sent through the mail. If you've been paying any attention to this area for the last 30 years, the venue of choice now is the internet. There are 85 million images of children being abused on the internet. I would like to deter the internet from being the venue of choice. So she literally said she thought it would be unfair to punish somebody for just hitting a button because that's so easy. In my world, in our world, I think, every time you hit the button, you should go to jail longer. So if other judges are replicating this, if this is a problem with our judiciary, I want to find out about it and do something about it. So President Biden made a political choice, and he has every right to make that choice. He wanted to satisfy the most radical elements in the Democratic Party. And I think he's been successful in doing that. And I just conclude with this thought, that Senator Booker, who's a good friend, had a fairly dramatic reading of the vote regarding Judge Jackson, highlighting the historical nature that this is the first African-American female to ever ascend to the court. And that's something, that's a good day for America, for the court to look more like the country that the court presides over. But what I will never let go is the idea that was possible because of the filibuster by Democrats of a highly qualified African-American nominee by President Bush, Janice Rogers Brown. The reason she's not the first African-American woman on the Supreme Court is because they filibustered her and denied her that ability. They held her ideology against her. They said she was too extreme, and not one person in the media ever mentioned the fact that they're filibustering an African-American woman who is in line to be on the Supreme Court because the media agrees. What did we learn from this hearing? double standards abound. That if you asked hard, penetrating questions, then all of a sudden you're a racist if the nominee is a liberal African American. You can literally filibuster these people, African American, Hispanic nominees, as a Democrat and get applauded. We don't like that, and we're not going to put up with that. So we're always going to remind the public that the only reason Judge Jackson is the first African American female to go on the court is they stopped a Republican nominee because of her ideology. To my Democratic friends, we're not going to forget that. And if we get in charge of the Senate in 2022, 2023, we have a majority. I can promise you nominees like this will not make it through. That we'll go back to the old system of collaboration. It's not that there won't be any more judges, but I promise you that if we were in charge and we had a say, there would be somebody less extreme filling this seat. And I want to tell my Democratic friends, as you celebrate this nomination, I will never, ever forget what you did to Miguel Estrada and Janice Rogers Brown.
All right, any questions? Yes.
You mentioned your issues with her sentencing decisions. Is it just that you're concerned about the sentencing, or do you think there's more? What kind of impacts do you think that her decision on sentencing will have, or do you have other? Is it just about the messaging, or is there other concerns?
It's not messaging. It is her actual judicial record. Her record as a judge. She has a consistent pattern in 100% of the cases where she had discretion. She sentenced below the sentencing guidelines, substantially below the prosecutor's recommendation, and way, way, way below the average sentence of other federal district judges. That is a pattern, and it's a pattern that goes back 3 decades. In law school, her academic writing advocated for increased scrutiny and for striking down many of the important laws that protect against sexually violent predators. Laws like civil commitment laws that many states across the union, including the state of Texas, has passed. 30 years ago, she and I were classmates in law school. We were on the law review together. Personally speaking, she is bright, she is charming, she is talented, but her record is extreme, and it suggests a 3-decade-long pattern of advocating for very, very lenient sentences for violent criminals and in particular for sex offenders. I think that is a deeply disturbing pattern.
Sorry, if you could just clarify, what specific consequences are you concerned about? How will it impact our nation?
I am concerned that she will vote over and over and over again to release violent criminals from jail. She will vote over and over and over again to overturn capital murder convictions, to strike down death penalty sentences. She will vote over and over and over again to strike down serious punishments for sex offenders. All of that is extreme. All of that is dangerous. And I believe her record indicates that she will be ideologically substantially to the left of any justice to ever serve on the court. I believe she will be to the left of Justice Sotomayor. She will be to the left of Justice Kagan, and I think she will be way, way, way to the left of Justice Breyer, the justice who she'll be replacing. Yeah.
To Senator Graham's point just now, the GOP takes a majority this year, and there's a potential Supreme Court vacancy next year. What is your stance on whether and under what conditions Republicans should vote to confirm a Biden nomination?
Well, I think if we see a Republican majority in the Senate, it will have a very significant moderating effect on the Biden administration's nominees, not just to the Supreme Court, but to the federal courts and to the administration. The first year and a half, the Biden administration consistently has gone hard left. It has been the extreme radical left that has set the agenda. And that's part of the reason why politically they're in so much trouble, because the American people don't want a hard radical left agenda. I think if we have a Republican majority, we can expect substantially more scrutiny of Biden nominees across the board, and one would hope that will cause a moderating influence within the administration not to put up extreme nominees outside the mainstream.
Okay. And then just to follow up on some of the points you made on Judge Jackson's record, what's your reaction given all those points to the fact 3 of your Republican colleagues are expected to vote for it today?
Well, listen, every senator has to make his or her own choice. And it's not complicated that if you're a Republican and you vote for a Democratic Supreme Court nominee, especially if that Supreme Court nominee happens to be the first African-American woman to serve on the court, that all the good folks in the media will praise you, will discuss how you're a statesman, how you're wise, how you're enlightened. Amazingly enough, if a Democrat votes for a Republican nominee, you're never a statesman, you're never wise, you're never enlightened, you're a horrible traitor. Years ago, there was a dynamic on the Supreme Court that was referred to as the greenhouse effect. Linda Greenhouse, famously, was the New York Times Supreme Court reporter. And she would praise Republican nominees when they moved left and excoriate them otherwise. And the greenhouse effect was the effect of sitting justices to evolve to the left, to the left, to the left, to get the praise of the corporate media. It's not just judges. Unfortunately, senators are susceptible to that as well. All right, we'll do one final question. Yeah.
One of your House colleagues, GOP House colleagues, called Senators Romney, Murkowski, and Collins pro-pedophile for choosing to vote for Judge Jackson's nomination. Do you agree with that sentiment?
No, I think that's silly. All right, thank you, guys.